In the previous lesson, we saw how to test uploads that are direct to our server, and now we want to take a look at how we test uploads that are direct to the cloud. So let's go ahead and dive into it. If you go into your router, you'll notice that we have a live session with movies and a movies live index and a movie live show. Now this is very similar to the album. In fact, let's go ahead and open up our browser, launch your app, and you'll see that this is extremely similar to what we had with albums. Now, I've already configured mine with the credentials needed to use the service where I'm uploading this file, so yours might not work yet. Just hold on a minute. But the idea is the very same as we had before. We're going to type in the name here, in this case of a movie. Let's call the Fellowship of the Ring. And I'm going to browse some files. And I'll go ahead and grab the Fellowship of the Ring poster. And we also have validations here. If I upload too many, it'll tell me that. But it has the same functionality as before. I'll go ahead and upload. And there we go. It redirects us to the movie show. It's another live view, and it's rendering the poster. But in this case, this is actually uploaded to an external service, and in my case, to Cloudinary. Now, let's go ahead and dive into the code. Let's open up Movie Live Index. And you'll see that this is very, very, very similar to the Album Live Index. And I did that intentionally because I want the differences to be very apparent. So let's dive into the code. I'll go ahead and find the mount function first. And let's take a look at it. We're mounting a chain set, which we'll be using for the form. And then just as before, we allowed an upload. In this case, it's posters. We're accepting the same types of formats. We're also doing max entries too. Of course, you can change this if you want. And this is the key. Since we're doing external uploads, we have the external key and we pass in the pre-sign upload, which is the function that will run. Let's go ahead and take a look at that function. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm using Cloudinary. You can use anything you want. Cloudinary offers a free plan, so you can test this out if you want. You can go ahead and create an account and get the credentials needed, and this will work. If you prefer, you could also swap the implementation to use something like the sample S3 uploads that are available in Phoenix LiveView. But I'll go ahead and continue with Cloudinary. I'll go over a little bit of this. It's not really important how this is working. These are the mechanics of it, but I want to go over it because we want to test this. So we have a cloud name that comes from configuration. That's something that comes from Cloudinary. Then we have a few fields, like the folder where I'm going to store this, the public ID. And then I have my Cloudinary credentials. Once I have that, I'm actually going to create a new set of fields with a signature and things like that. So I use this Cloudinary upload. You're welcome to go into it and take a look at what this is doing, but it's basically creating the signed upload. I'll go back to the pre-signed upload now. And once we do that, we have this metadata, right? We'll have the uploader, which is Cloudinary. And of course, if you've done any external uploads before, this uploader needs to match what we have in our app.js. And then we have the URL. And once again, I'm using that Cloudinary upload module to do that. And the fields, which are the updated fields that I have here. So that includes the signed fields and stuff like that. And then I return that metadata with a socket. All right, now that we've seen that, let's go ahead and take a look at the render really quick. When we render, we're rendering something very similar to the album live. Once again, we have a form here with a chain set. It has a Phoenix change validate, Phoenix submit save. We have a single input, which is the name, and then we have the live file input so that we can upload the posters. We have the button to submit. And finally, once we submit those, we can see the previews, and it's this very same as Album Live. We have the errors, and for each entry, we can go ahead and render the live image preview, and we have the button to cancel that preview. All of this is working the exact same way as before. For example, let's take a look at the handle events. If you see the validate, it's doing the same thing where we're grabbing the params, putting them chain set, validating it, returning the chain set. If we want to cancel the upload, we're doing the exact same thing as we did the album live. The place that differs is the save. Once we save this and we consume the uploaded entries, we're no longer moving the file from a temporary file path to our server's file path. Instead, we're going to return the Cloudinary image URL for that file. I extracted this into a function, and you can take a look at it further below, and you can see it's once again doing some Cloudinary stuff. Once again, if you're using S3 or something different, this would be different for you. But in this case, I'm grabbing the folder, I grab the cloud name, I get the Cloudinary URL, and then I concatenate all of those to generate the Cloudinary image URL. I'll go back to where we were. And once we have those uploaded file paths, we're doing the same thing as before. We're grabbing the params, we're putting the poster URLs, and we're passing them to the movie chain set along with the name, and then we insert it. Once we insert that, if we successfully save that movie, we push navigate to the movie's show path. Awesome. I hope you can see it's not very different from the album live. But what can we test? Let's go ahead and open up the movie live index test. And note that because our previews behave the same way as before, all of the previous tests that we had work. Now, I haven't included all of those here. They are available in the index done test in the other version of this file if you want to take a look at them. But I left one test here because we're going to use it in a second. But before we touch this test, I want to go ahead and write a different test. The test we're going to write is a test that ensures we have the correct metadata for external upload. Basically, I'll go back to the index. It's going to test this external key and pre-sign upload. So let's go ahead and write that test. I'll go ahead and say generates correct metadata for external upload. Taking the connection struct as usual. And now let's go ahead and copy the setup from the previous test a little bit. And what I'll do is I'll actually copy something that's available in our upload function. We'll grab the view, we'll use the file input, we'll target our form, we'll pass in the posters. And here, let's actually pass a file name. In this case, let's go ahead and call fellowshipposter.png. We'll use the same file. Leave the extra there. And just so you know, this is another file I added. This is also available under test support images. You'll see it there, fellowship poster. So you should have that available. And once we do that, previously what we were doing, we were uploading this image. But now we're going to use another Phoenix LiveView test helper called pre-flight upload. And what that function will do is it'll return an OK and some metadata. And that metadata is the metadata that gets generated from us using that pre-sign upload that we pass to the external key when we allow the uploads on the mount function. So in this case, we actually only care about the entries in that metadata. So I'm going to pattern match those out. And what we'll do is we'll make assertions about those entries. Now, because we're only uploading one file, there will only be one entry, but I'm still going to write the test like this. Those entries have a key and a value. The key is not important, but we'll grab the values because that's a map of data for that entry that we care about. And so what can we assert here? Some of the things we assert here will be dependent on your uploader, but there are a few things that are generic. For example, we can assert here that the entry uploader is Cloudinary. Go ahead and save that and run that test. As you can see, it passes. And if we go to the index file and we go to the pre-sign upload function, you'll see that if I change the uploader to something else like S3 and I rerun the test, this test now fails. So this is helpful in that we're testing this metadata that is returning, and we can be sure that the uploader we're testing is the same uploader we should have defined in the app.js. You can actually take a look at that. I'll go ahead and open up app.js, and you can see that we have an uploader Cloudinary defined along with its JavaScript code here. And so our test is ensuring that we're passing the correct uploader in here. Let's go ahead and see what else we can test. You might already see that we have a URL and fields here. And if you were guessing we're going to test those things, that's absolutely right. We're going to try to test some of those things. So let's go back to our test and let's add a few more assertions. For example, I'll assert that the URL here is something like a Cloudinary URL. I'm not going to be super specific, but I'll go ahead and test that it includes the image API URL and it has the cloud name. Now that cloud name is not something that's defined, so let's go ahead and define it. And that's something I get from the application configuration. Excellent. So I'll go ahead and save this. And the module is not available. And of course, let's go ahead and alias that. Rerun that test. Excellent. Now it passes. So just so you know, this is configuration that you have defined. In test, you can go ahead and take a look at config test. These are hard-coded values, so it's not important. But if you're trying to test this in development, you do need the API key, API secret, and your cloud name from Cloudinary. All right, but we're testing that. And as you might have guessed, if we go to the index file, that is the URL that we have right here. So if we change this to something ridiculous like slash, this should fail. Excellent. As you can see, we don't have that URL. So I'll put this back. I'll keep running that test to make sure we're back to normal. Awesome. So let's go back to the test and see what else we can test. Now we've tested the uploader and the URL, but of course there are other things we can test, and those are the fields. Now the fields are even more specific to Cloudinary. So I'm going to go ahead and write some assertions here, but don't feel like you need to write them this way. These are specific to Cloudinary, and they're the things I want to test. So let's go ahead and see what kinds of things I would test. So I'll grab the fields, and an important concept is the folder. So I'll just make sure that that folder is testing LiveView. I also want to assert that we have a public ID, but I don't want to be too specific about that public ID because it's generated. So I'm just going to make sure it's binary, so a string. So I'll grab it from the fields. And I also want to make sure that that public ID does not end with the extension. So for example, I want to make sure that the public ID does not end with JPEG. So I'll refute that. Let's make sure I run this. Excellent. And why am I testing this? Just to give you an example, I'm testing that because Cloudinary, it is important that this file name does not end with the extension. If we use the same file name that we used in the album live, for example, that would fail with Cloudinary. So that used to go something like this. Go ahead and rerun that test. And that fails because now we're including that fellowship poster.jpg at the end, and Cloudinary does not like that. So those are the kinds of things you can test to make sure that you're covering all your bases based on the uploader you're using. All right, I'll put this back. I'll rerun the test and go back to the test. Excellent. There's more things we could test here. For example, that we have a signature and that the API key is there and that the a timestamp that gets generated are there. I'll leave those for an exercise. They're available in the done file if you want them. But I want to go ahead and move on to the next thing. So this tests that we're generating the correct metadata. But of course, as you know by now, LiveViewTest doesn't allow us to test the JavaScript. So no matter what we do, we will never be able to test this app.js. We could go ahead and delete all of the uploaders, and our test would continue to pass, which means our code would be broken. But there's nothing we can do about that in this case. So let's go back to the test and see what else can we assert. One other thing I'd like to test is that we're saving the correct URL. If you remember when we saw the index file, we generate this Cloudinary image URL when we consume the uploads. Now this URL is what we're going to store in our movie poster URLs. And so I want to make sure that this is the correct URL that we're generating. So let's go ahead and write a test for that. Now, how could we assert that? It's difficult to assert that we've created the correct URL in a way that the user can see it. What do I mean? I typically like to make my LiveView tests user-focused. That means I like to test things that the user can see. The user would be able to see the image, but we cannot test the full end-to-end flow because we're not testing JavaScript and we don't even have access to the external system in tests. So I think in this case, it's a good trade-off to assert that the record we've saved in the database has the correct type of image. We're not even going to be too specific about the image, but we just want to make sure that the image is something like we'd expect. So in this user can create a movie. I'll go ahead and amend this test and say, and stores correct URLs. And at the end, I'm going to assert that the last movie's poster URLs, and we're just going to grab one of those poster URLs, has something like a Cloudinary upload image URL. Of course, the real URL will also have maybe the UUID or things like that. But in this case, all we're caring about is that we have a Cloudinary URL there, something that gives us enough confidence that we're saving the correct URL. In this case, we're going to use the Cloudinary upload image URL with cloud name. So I'll go ahead and write the last movie function here. And let's go ahead and get the Ranger movie. And of course, you could alias these and make this a little bit more clean, but I think it works for now. So I'll go ahead and rerun this test. Excellent, it passes. Now, in case that was a little confusing, the thing I'm trying to test is this. Let's go back to the index. And I'm trying to make sure that with this cloudinary image URL is generating the correct thing. As you can see, this cloudinary image URL function is part of the path we have. So that's what we're testing. We're testing that that's included. We're not really testing that the folder or the file name are correct, but I think the test gives me enough confidence to know that we're executing this test. Now, why are we testing that? Because previously, in our direct-to-server approach, we were doing something like uploads, and here we had the file name entry. Right? So if I rerun that test now, we should see that it fails, and here we can see clearly that we're expecting to have something that includes that cloudinary URL, and instead we don't have that. So that's what that is testing for us, and it's making sure that we're storing the correct URL. I'll rerun that test and make it pass. Excellent. Now, of course, like I mentioned before, I prefer my LiveViewTest to be user-centric. That is, we want to test things from the user's perspective and things the user can see. Our user can't see into our database, and so this isn't a test that I would normally write, but I think the trade-off is good here because we can't test a JavaScript, but we want to make sure that we're saving the correct URL. So in this case, I think the trade-off is worth it, and that's what I would do. Whether or not you want to test everything end-to-end, including the JavaScript with something like Wallaby, I leave up to you. But I hope you can see that Phoenix LiveViewTest is powerful enough and gives us enough confidence in many areas. In this case, it allows us to test the metadata, and it allows us to test that we're storing the correct data URLs in our records. And with that, I feel confident enough in our external uploads. Happy testing.